Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hey, it is our first show of November and it is going to be 2021 before we know it, if you can believe it. So beginning our broadcast today, you may remember that back in June, ag producers were left in limbo when the Ninth Circuit Court in California vacated the EPA's approval of several dicamba products. But last week, EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler announced the approval of 3 dicamba herbicides for use over the top of dicamba-tolerant soybeans and cotton. It will expire in 2025. The new 5-year registration was granted for XtendiMax and Ingenia, in addition to the re-registered dicamba herbicide Tavium. All 3 products will require a nationwide June 30th cutoff date for use in soybeans and a July 30th cutoff date for use in cotton, regardless of growth stage. Additionally, the agency made clear they will limit states' abilities to add further restrictions to the federal labels. Still, there are some restrictions and safety guidelines you should know about before using these products.
One of the biggest things, of course, is the downwind buffers and so forth, especially those with endangered species, and it's been increased as much as 310 feet. And there's some other restrictions in there. Now you can go a little bit less, and you can read the label on that if you have a hooded sprayer and some of those things. But I always caution people on the downwind, be really extremely careful on that, even if you meet the minimum requirements and so forth, because we know wind in Nebraska here can be a real problem and so forth. And if you have a center pivot, after about 8 hours of application, consider running that pivot around if the soil is not too wet. But you don't need a lot of water. It showed that 4/100th was almost as good as 2/3 of an inch in reducing volatility afterwards. That's one of the restrictions. Another one is adding a pH buffering agent. And we know from past experience that when we add some of these products to the water and so forth, it lowers the pH, especially if it's fairly low to begin with, and that increases volatility. So that's another one that's really important. And then one other thing to follow up on, they're trying to make it a little bit easier to comply with the label and understand the label for application. But all these things are really critical. And like I say, make sure you always check the label out. Really critical to do that and make sure you comply with the label.
A 4th dicamba herbicide, Fexapan, was not included in the decision. Wheeler also expressed confidence that the new label changes should sufficiently address the problems with the original 2018 registrations. State pesticide regulators have urged the EPA to implement a nationwide cutoff date for dicamba herbicides for the past 3 years. To see the full labels for these 3 herbicides, you can visit beta.regulations.gov. Next up, the comfortable temperatures this week have been a treat, but it is the time of year when we'll need to prepare for the inevitable cold weather. One of the first things on the list are farms and our animals. Last week, we told you some ways beef producers can get their herds ready when the temperature drops. This week, UNL Extension educator Kim Clark tells us what steps dairy producers need to take for healthy cows and hopefully healthy profits.
So if you think about wintertime, it's a little colder, so a little more energy is needed to maintain body temperature. And so that's something that we need to think about as nutritionists and dairy producers are formulating rations. We really want to make sure that we're not only meeting growth and typical energy needs, but we need to think about a cooler environment as well. Really, cows like an environment that's right around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the insides of barns, typically our freestall barns, are going to be right in that optimal range anyway. So a little bit of concern for meeting energy needs, but maybe not as much as the beef cattle side.
Definitely. So talk to me about body condition scoring and why we need to pay particular attention to that during the colder months.
So body condition scoring, so for the dairy cattle, we use a scoring system of 1 to 5, where 1 is very thin, 5 is overly fat. And so we always want to try, no matter what time of year, we want to keep right around that body condition score of 3 for lactating dairy cows, just depending on if they're pregnant, early lactation, late lactation. So if we can maintain right around that 3% body condition score all year long, that's optimal.
And there may be some producers who have calves that are recently born, young calves. What are some things that we can do with calves during the wintertime to make sure that they're staying safe and that they're comfortable and that they're healthy?
Calves are probably the animals that we need to be most concerned with. They're lower body weight. It's really hard for them to maintain their body temperature. And so during the winter months, we're providing calf jackets. We're adding calf jackets to the calves. Anytime temperatures are 50 degrees or below, we want to make sure those calf jackets are on the calves. That way they can focus all of their food that they're consuming, whether it's a pelleted starter grain or milk or colostrum. They're taking those energy needs and applying it to their growth, not to maintain their body temperature. If they're in hutches, we want to make sure that the hutches are facing away from that cold wind. So in Nebraska, we recommend facing the hutches to the south or southeast. Any winds coming from those directions typically are warmer. Add extra bedding to any housing environments. Even if calves are indoors, just add some extra bedding. Straw is a great bedding option. It adds warmth and insulation more than some of your other bedding options like sawdust.
And are there any checks that need to be made on the farm or any farming equipment during this time of year?
During the winter to prepare, there's really a full checklist, from checking the animals, which we talked about, to checking the housing. So if you have a freestall barn, checking the curtains, are they free of rips and tears? If you have heifers in open lots, we usually recommend, if you can get bales around those open lots, just to provide some kind of wind protection or wind shelter. Just a little area for the heifers and open lot animals to get out of the wind and have some protection. But it goes beyond the housing and animal needs. You know, check your equipment. Is all of your equipment ready to go for the winter needs? So looking at your tractors, is all the maintenance done or all the repairs done? We need to look at all of the equipment that's used on the farm also.
And it's good to have a backup plan when it comes to hauling milk, right?
Oh, absolutely. Backup plans. I always say not only plan B, but you want to have plan B, C, and D. You never know when the milk hauler might not be able to make it out to your farm because of the roads, or maybe he'll make it out to a dairy farm and not be able to leave because he gets snowed in or something happens. And actually we experienced that earlier this year. We had some weather conditions that drivers weren't able to make it to dairy farms to pick up milk. Or if they were able to make it to the farms, they ended up detouring hundreds of miles out of their way because of closed roads. And so what's your backup plan? How are you changing your milking schedule, or what are you doing with excess milk? So always have those plans A, B, C, and D in place.
All right, and plans E, F, G all the way to Z, never a bad idea either. Kim is also heading up a new dairy podcast that you can download wherever you get your podcasts. You can find it by searching I-29 Moo University. We've got a link on the Market Journal website too. Let's keep with the livestock theme, and we'll check on the cattle markets now. Mississippi State University Livestock Economist Josh Maples joined me Wednesday to discuss what he's watching. And we began by talking about the recent rally in cattle futures prices. Last week, the November feeder cattle contract had its highest closing price in about a month at over $137. So what happened?
We've certainly seen some volatility in that market or in those futures markets, right? And it was just a few weeks ago, you mentioned the high, but it was just a few weeks ago that we were talking about the lowest feeder futures contract levels since back in the spring. We know about the challenges that we had there. So, last week was a big rebound week, and it erased a lot of that decline that we saw in the previous couple of weeks. There's quite a bit going on here. Live cattle futures rallied also, and of course that helps feeder prices. But on the feedstuff side, we had a lot of action. We saw a winter storm bring some much needed precipitation, especially to that southern plains region where winter pasture conditions were getting pretty dicey. So that hopefully is going to allow for some more winter pasture progress there and some more stocker demand. But then we also saw corn prices drop. Corn prices have been on a prolonged rally. And we saw a pretty sharp drop in what corn prices were doing. That, of course, also lends some strength to feeder markets. So both of those things really are situations that changed some last week and are going to be something to continue to keep an eye on moving forward for what feeder cattle prices are doing.
So in your opinion, Josh, what's it going to take for this market to keep going up for both live cattle and feeders?
Yeah, well, the first thing, especially on the auction, like the cash price side, is, we're in the middle of what normally is our seasonal low at auction prices for a lot of weight classes. Now, seasonal patterns are different depending on what weight classes you're talking about. But we're in the middle of big runs of cattle right now, hitting auctions. So, as we come out of that, that will probably provide a little bit of strength depending on weight class from a seasonal standpoint. But also what continues to happen, Troy, with the feedstuff side. That storm last week, as we said, hopefully is going to allow winter pasture to get a little boost and provide a little bit more demand for stocker cattle. But that's gonna be a story throughout the winter. I mean, we talk about La Nina conditions are expected throughout the winter. That's dry conditions. So what impact that has on winter pasture and how long stocker cattle can stay out on pasture. But then also what continues to happen with corn. So I think the feedstuff side is the one that I'm really kind of paying the most attention to right now in terms of what can happen with feeder cattle prices.
And yeah, you mentioned corn. We've been talking a lot about corn the last couple of weeks on the show. It was up over $4 last week. As of this recording, it's about $4 even. So for the guy watching who has some feeder cattle, what does he need to be doing right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that there's a clear answer at this point. Corn prices, they've shown the strength that you mentioned before last week, had a pretty sharp drop last week. As always, Troy, I'm a proponent of some price risk management if it makes sense for your operation. I mean, everybody's going to be a little bit different in terms of what you need it for and for how long you need it. But, I don't think there are clear signs right now that say, you have to lock in right here because we're about to see a big rally or anything like that. So, again, it's an important question, and I encourage everybody to look at it a little differently from their particular perspective. But I could see either side. I could see the side of wanting to do some risk management now, but also kind of on the wait and see side as well.
Any guesses as to where you see corn going over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the WASDE next week. So, my guess, Troy, is at least until we get to that next WASDE report that's going to give us some updated production estimates, that we're going to hang around that $4 range, given kind of what's happened the last few days after the drop. So that report's going to be really important, I believe, in particular this year, just given some of the uncertainties surrounding it. And additionally, there's other things besides just production here in the U.S. that are going to matter. And, keeping an eye on progress in Brazil. And then also corn exports have been pretty strong. And so each of those, continuing to track those moving forward is going to have pretty big implications for corn prices here in the U.S. So there's quite a bit of factors right now that's making it really hard to really project a clear path.
And Josh, we'll end it today with any marketing or risk management advice you'd like to leave us with as we move through November.
Yeah, I'm going to bring us back to the feeder futures, Troy, because I think that's a really important point right now. If you look at projected stocker budgets in particular, and I'm looking at that March feeder futures contract that a lot of folks use for winter grazing. Uh, those projected stocker budgets look a lot better now than they did just a short time ago, in part because of the rally that we mentioned earlier. So I would encourage folks to anybody that's looking at keeping stocker cattle through the winter to really crunch the numbers and see if doing some sort of risk management makes sense for you right now, given the positive swing that we've seen in recent, really in the past 10 days or so. So that's my point right now, Troy. Is we've seen a pretty beneficial run up in feeder futures. It's worth taking a look at whether you should do something now.
Next week, we'll be joined by Iowa State University's Chad Hart. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get a hold of us on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Next up, COVID-19 has changed the game for how people entertain themselves. Closed movie theaters, bars, and restaurants, and canceled sporting events have put countless outings on hold this year, including in rural America. However, farmers and ranchers are known for their ingenuity, and the pandemic has definitely shown that. For example, John and Susan Nelson, a husband and wife who raise corn and soybeans on their farm near Monroe in Platte County, built a home drive-in movie theater this summer. Read about the project in the November Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, I must say it was a pretty pleasant week, but is it coming to an end?
Well, Troy, you're exactly right. We've had a nice week this last week, and we look like we're going to see that at least continue through the first half of this weekend before things start to fall apart rather rapidly. Very warm conditions this week, record highs off and on all the way through the state, basically off from Tuesday all the way through this Friday. And we're not going to see records probably this weekend, but we are definitely going to see some very windy conditions, and unfortunately our little taste of Indian summer, if that's what you want to call it, is going to come to a drastic end. So let's get right to it and get right to the upper air pattern. And from what you can see from our upper air charts, we have a humongous trough in the western United States that is going to bring a big fetch of southerly and southwesterly flow at the surface up through the central plains. Big high pressure system basically to the east, the big low to the west, tight pressure gradient, high winds. A little bit of precipitation starts to show up, breaking out into the Rockies, more organized snowfall up across the northern Rockies. And as we get into tomorrow, that trough starts to make its way toward the east. That's going to lift a quick shot of moisture up through the western panhandle, but most of it's going to concentrate up across the northern plains in the form of snow. And we can see that basically generating a massive snowstorm up in Montana. Lighter precipitation. The trough starts to move its way through the region on Monday. Low pressure to our south is going to bring Gulf moisture up. The big question is how much of interaction with the surface front will we have in eastern Nebraska before it passes to the east of us. But at least the models are indicating the chance for showers and maybe an isolated thunderstorm. And that system rapidly moves off to the east, and we might catch a little bit of snow on the back side of it. But overall, high pressure moves back into the region. And we'll probably be under that influence for a good portion of the week as this low pressure system itself moves toward the east. More importantly, we get another piece of energy tries to develop to our southwest and west as we go into the midweek period. That's going to bring another piece of energy out into the central plains. Low pressure develops over portions of Oklahoma and Kansas, but most of the moisture remains well to our north and our west. It looks like we're probably going to skirt by fairly decent and across western Nebraska with no precipitation. But as that system pushes closer to us on Thursday, we're probably going to see some precipitation across eastern Nebraska. Right now it looks like it's going to be in the form of rain, maybe just a slight change over to snow across northeastern Nebraska. And more importantly, as we go into the day on Friday, we start to see that worst wave move out, kind of get a zonal flow, a little bit of a warming trend as another major trough moves into the western United States, and most likely we'll see an increasing temperatures as we go into next weekend before that storm starts to make its way into our region as we go into late weekend in the following week. And in terms of the forecast for temperatures during this period, the 8 to 14 day forecast for next Thursday through the following Tuesday, Very warm conditions to our east with that high pressure in place. The trough to our west is going to bring that cool air into most of the western United States. And in terms of precipitation, we're going to be caught between storms. So big storms start to move into the Pacific Northwest, dry across the central plains and northern plains, including Nebraska. And our exiting system that impacts us late in the week moves off to the east. So overall, it looks like this taste of summer has come to an end. We are going to see a very cool pattern next week, basically stuck in the 40s and 50s with an occasional shot of precipitation, but overall nothing widespread that would cause us major concerns.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, producers still have an opportunity in early November to get ahead of thistle populations in their pastures. Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with Extension Educator Megan Taylor to find out more.
Landowners across Nebraska are no stranger to thistles. These weeds are an annual challenge to control, and while there are many broadleaf weeds and forbs that can act as supplemental forage, thistles fall very short of any practical need for landowners and livestock alike. With a wide-ranging variety of thistles in Nebraska, if you're unsure of how to proceed or what to look for specifically, there are institutions in place to assist in identification.
Thistles also spread very aggressively. So for our landowners and livestock owners, if you start out with a couple, that next year, especially the biennial thistles, they're going to move by wind. Their seed moves by wind, so they can really spread. The other thing is some of these thistles are on the noxious weeds list in Nebraska. So we got to take care of them because we don't want to get fines. You can also contact your weed authority in your county if you do see some of these weeds come up and you're not really sure how to control them. They can also help you with identification, or your local extension educator can help you identify the thistles. So really, thistles are just one of those things we want to get in front of them because they are aggressive, and once you have them, they're hard to control. So we want to try to mitigate their spread as much as possible.
The four particular varieties landowners and livestock producers should home in on are musk, plumeless, scotch, and bull thistles. These biennials tend to be much easier to control this time of year when they're in the rosette stage. Acting now will help deter seed production next season.
They require 2 growing seasons to flower and reproduce. And so in fall, they're in the rosette stage. So that is the stage they are at prior to then bolting, flowering, and producing seed. And so when they are in the rosette stage, they're pretty small. So we do have really good chemical control over them because they are smaller. They're getting ready to try to go into that overwintering period. If we can weaken them, they're not going to have the stored reserves to be able to make it through the winter. So for the biennial thistles, it's a really good opportunity to kind of stop them before they're able to then, make seed, reproduce, and continue to be a nuisance.
Once you have a strategy in place for those pesky biennial thistles, you'll still want to be on the lookout for Canada thistle. While fall treatments are effective, they're not enough to maintain a firm control over their populations, making spring applications a necessity as well.
For the Canada thistle, it's a little bit different because it is a creeping perennial, but Canada thistle control now is the new growth. So if we're thinking about looking for them compared to the biennials are going to be totally flat. They're going to be flat on the ground in a rosette, whereas the Canada thistles are going to be a little bit more upright. So they're not going to be flat on the ground like a rosette, but they are smaller. So we have the opportunity to kind of knock them back a little bit. This fall spraying is not a silver bullet in terms of controlling it. So we really want to try to think of fall spraying in conjunction with spring spraying and other management options. So there was some previous research done by Robert Wilson, and he is a former UNL professor. And what he really was able to show with his research is that the control of Canada thistle went from 33% control when an herbicide was only applied in spring to 90% control when fall applications were made with a subsequent spring application. So if you were spraying them in fall, the Canada thistle, and sprayed them in spring, you were getting 90% control compared to when you only sprayed in spring, you're only getting 33% control over Canada thistle.
Making sure you have the right tools for the job is half the battle. There are many choices for thistle control when it comes to herbicide selections. Whichever product you select, you'll want to base your decision on which product will get you the best result for the specific thistle in question, while inflicting as little damage to the surrounding vegetation as possible.
But ultimately, when we're choosing the product, just read and follow the label directions And the use of the trade names is not us recommending a product, it's just for educational purposes. And also some of the products for range and for pasture control have recently changed names. So if you have traditionally bought a product, that product may no longer exist as we knew it, because the name may have changed with some of the mergers with these chemical companies. So please make sure that when you're buying products this year, that you are actually buying the product that you are wanting to purchase. So check for the active ingredients, and then when you're purchasing it, talk to the salesman as well as your agronomist. So some of the products are Grazon Next HL, Milestone, Chaparral, Graslin L, Stinger, Overdrive, and Tordon 22K. These all have good efficacy ratings across any of the biennial thistles as well as Canada thistle. You could also use a combination of 2,4-D mixed with dicamba, but you have to use those products when we do have a higher temperature. So if we are having a really hot autumn day, or not a really hot autumn day because, volatilization, but if it's warmer, go ahead, use 2,4-D and dicamba mixed together. But any of the products I mentioned earlier, those can be used through October and November, and they still have pretty good efficacy even as we get a little bit cooler. If you're going to use Tordon 22K, if you're going to use the Graslin L, just be careful with those two products because those products can injure woody plants. So if you have some trees, just make sure that you're being really careful when you're spot spraying for the thistles around any of those woody plants because they can kill woody plants.
Once you've made your selection, all that remains is making the application. And as always, remember to read and follow label instructions before use. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Megan also tells us it may not be a bad idea to consider spot spraying individual plants or patches of plants as opposed to spraying the entire pasture. That could help preserve potentially beneficial forbs. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.